Since 3rd century, Rome Empire fell into crisis. At that time, Germanic tribes from south came down to invade. Germanic was a tribe in northeast Rome. Because of fast economy development and population increase, some Germanic tribes immigrated to province of Rome Empire. In the first half of 5th century, German established kingdoms in western Rome, as Visigoths, Vandals, Burgundy. By the 5th century AD, the Western Roman Empire was losing military strength and political cohesion. In 476, Western Rome Empire fell. German continued founding 3 kingdoms as Ostrogoths, Langobards, and Franks. Essentially, Roman civilization was overrun by these variants of Germanic peoples during the 5th century, so before and after the Western Rome Empire perished, on the old land of the empire, German kingdoms were founded. However, the majority of countries could survive only in a short time. Not only did Frank last a long time, but it also had an important role during history of Western Europe in medieval period. Charlemagne was a king of the Franks, and he became the first Holy Roman Emperor. He is known for expanding the territory and power of his kingdom of the Franks, and for subjugating the Germanic Saxons. His long reign, which began in 768 as cold ruler with his brother, and then from 771 to 814 AD as the sole ruler, makes Charlemagne be one of the most historically important rulers of the Middle Ages. Once in power, Charlemagne sought to unite all the Germanic peoples into one kingdom, and convert his subjects to Christianity. In order to carry out this mission, he spent the majority of his reign engaged in military campaigns. After becoming the king, he conquered the Lombards, in present-day northern Italy, the Avars, in modern-day Austria and Hungary, and Bavaria, among others. By 50 wars, Charlemagne turned Franks to be a big kingdom. It's quite big as Rome Empire before. In his role as a zealous defender of Christianity, Charlemagne gave money and land to the Christian Church and protected the popes. Later, in 800 CE, he was crowned by the Pope Leo III as the King of the Holy Roman Empire. The Church and Charlemagne depended on each other. The Pope needed the support of his army to protect the Church. Charlemagne gained support from his people because he was viewed as having God on his side. In 813, Charlemagne crowned his son Louis the Pious, King of Aquitaine, as cold emperor. Louis became sole emperor when Charlemagne died in January 814, ending his reign of more than 4 decades. In 840, the Pious died. 3 sons of he did civil war to rival throne. Finally, they signed Treaty of Verdun in August 843. After Louis's death, open warfare broke out. Louis's second son allied with Charles in attacking the eldest son, the Emperor Lothar I. Lothar was confirmed in possession of the imperial title and received Francia Media, a long central strip of territory including parts of modern Belgium, the Netherlands, western Germany, eastern France, Switzerland, and much of Italy. Louis the German received Francia Orientalis, the land east of the Rhine River. Charles received Francia Occidentalis, the remainder of modern France. In England, from the mid-5th century, Anglo-Saxon tribes began to migrate in large numbers into southern and eastern England. The Anglo-Saxons established a multitude of small kingdoms in eastern Britain. By around 600, these had coalesced into a small number of larger kingdoms. These kingdoms are Northumbria, Mercia, and Wessex. The kingdoms of the British Isles came under severe attack from Viking raiders from the end of the 8th century onwards. No area was safe, and large numbers of Norse settled in northern England, northern Scotland, and Ireland. At this date, large parts of Scotland and Ireland are still under Norse control. In England, the Norse attacks led directly to the disappearance of all the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms except Wessex. However, the kings of Wessex, starting with Alfred the Great, reigned 871 to 899, have fought the Vikings back and have succeeded in uniting the whole of England, plus southern Scotland, under their rule. In Spain, Visigoths' kingdom was established in 419. The Visigoths moved to the north to found small countries. In 11th century, Castillo, Aragon, Navarra, and Portugal were founded in Spain. Ferd Island was a prince of Aragon, and Isabella was a princess of Castillo. Ferd Island was married to Isabella. In 1474, Isabella acceded in Castillo and so did Ferd Island, therefore two countries combined and called Spain. In 1512, Navarra also combined with Spain. Portugal still was an independent country. After the fall of Roman Empire, kings and nobles started building castles and manors. That was the initiation of feudalism in Europe. Feudalism was a land-based economic system that combined certain social and legal customs in Europe during the Middle Ages. It was a social hierarchy, a political system and an economic system, all in one. The beauty of the system is that it achieved self-sufficiency. It was the giving up of freedom in exchange for protection. However, there was absolutely no mobility, no time for learning, and no intellectual advancements. It protected from the Vikings invaded from Scandinavia, the Magyars from Asia, and also the Muslims from south. The feudal system first appears indefinite, in the Frankish lands, in the 9th and 10th century, and spread to other lands in the 11th century. The word feudal derives from the word fief, which usually denotes an area of land held. A person who received a fief was held to be a vassal, and the one who gave fief to him was his lord. The king's was at the top, he owned a large land mass. All lords, nobles and knights swore an oath of loyalty to the king, to protect the land. Nobles' lords were wealthy, powerful, and had complete control of their land, called a manor. They established their own system of justice, minted their own money, and set their own taxes. However, the vassals had to serve on the royal council, pay rent, and provide the king with military service when he demanded it. Knights. They armored warriors that protected the land, and often received fiefs for their service. The peasants, at the lowest level of society, also called serfs or villeins. The lord offered his peasants protection, in exchange for living and working on his land. Hard of working and the high taxes. They had no rights, were never allowed to leave the manor, and had to ask their lord's permission before they could marry. Serfs were the majority of people, but their lives were wretched. The system had a very strict hierarchy, where everyone knew their place. You were born into your social position, whether you were royalty, a baron, lord, knight, serf, or peasant, and you kept that position until you died. A manorialism was the economic system that revolved around self-sufficient farming estates. Everything was produced on the manor and used by the people who lived on it. Manor usually consisted of three parts. First, domain land, directly under the control of the lord and his officials, the purpose of which was to support him and his household. Second, dependent land, which carried obligations to the lord, usually mainly labor service, but often including contributions in kind, or even money gifts. And third, free lands, for which the peasants paid money rent. And the problems with feudalism. First, possible to have allegiances to more than one person. Second, no strong central government, because the king must ask his lords for knights, in time of war, and ask them for money. So that lords hold most of power in the kingdoms. In 6th century, food production increased, and population also increased. There were more people to work and some of them went to the cities than many cities grew. Medieval cities. Medieval towns tended to grow around areas where people could easily meet, such as crossroads or rivers. Towns needed more water than villages, so a nearby water supply was vital. Rivers would provide the water used for washing and drinking. From the 12th century cities grew again. Some were old cities, but other were new ones. Medieval cities were small, no more than 30,000 inhabitants, and largest were Paris. During the early Middle Ages, the region of Paris city was fully under control of Germanic Franks. The first Merovingian king Clovis the Frank made Paris his capital city in 508. London was an old Roman city, which was effectively abandoned after the fall of Roman Empire in the 5th century. The city of London was developing as the biggest and most popular business, and a trade centre. Constantinople remained an important city of medieval times, even after the fall of Western Roman Empire, as Emperor Justinian gained strength. Even after the fall of Western Roman Empire, Rome remained as one of the most important and strongest Middle Ages cities of Europe. And many other cities grew in medieval times as Florence, Milan, Palermo. Causes of urban growth. Many peasants had to migrate to the cities to find work due to improvement in agriculture. The revival in trade made cities the center of the exchanges. Cities offered a better life, where all the inhabitants were free. The city council was the government of the cities. Inhabitants of the cities. Rich merchants, who governed cities. Craftsmen, shopkeepers, or domestic service. Poor people without a job. Most of the population were Christians, but there were also other groups, who lived in separated carts. The early Middle Ages began around 476 to 1050 CE, and were also known as the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages was a time when little development in trade and social structure occurred. Different from the late Middle Ages, occurred from 1050 to 1450, and was a time that experienced some growth in trade and agriculture. The cultural was almost destroyed by the fall of Roman Empire, except the Christianity. Most of the educational institutes of Romans ceased to offer their services. Education was not the main concern anymore, and fighting skills became more important. Most of the rulers and politicians gained power through wars or inheritance, while education played a little or no role in their success. The social and judicial society of medieval period was influenced by Roman and Germanic culture. However, the increasing influence of church became the guiding force to develop educational system. The church became more and more suspicious, decided close down all pagan schools, under the decree of Justinian by 529. Influence of church gave rise to monasticism. Monks, priests, and bishops took the responsibility of teaching, and the whole education pattern became purely religious. Education for serfs was a rare chance. This was because of the basic feudalism structure, which required the peasants and serfs to work hard, to earn a living and right to protection under the fiefdom of their lords. The little kids was used in work as soon as possible. It was advantageous for the ruler class and the clergy to keep the serf away from education institutes, so that they may successfully rule over them. The fees for education which was required by the church, monasteries, and cathedral schools, often too high for a common serf to pay for. Education during this time was very elitist. Study books were very rare, and they were highly expensive, and hence, the only way to get education was to seek a teacher. Students of upper class learned how to read and write Latin, which was the official language of the medieval ages. Some of the cathedral schools attained great fame, and became centers of higher education, and established themselves as the universities. Charlemagne's reign was characterized not just with warfare, but also with his political achievements. He also made a significant improvement in literacy and culture of the Frankish Empire. Because of the tendency to the ideals of the ancient Rome, and the very idea of restitution of literacy, culture, and art, this period is called the Carolingian Renaissance. But today, we just get information about the education. The court became a kind of academy, to use Alcuin's term. Alcuin's taught grammar, rhetoric, dialectic, and the elements of geometry, astronomy and music, and his success as a teacher of these branches seems to have been generally acknowledged by all the courtiers, as well as by his royal patron. In order to develop and staff other centers of culture and learning, Charlemagne imported considerable foreign talent. During the 8th century, England had been the scene of some intellectual activity. Compared to the few centuries before, the period of Charlemagne's reign can be truly considered a massive cultural ascent. The school system has been organized, literacy revived. Valuable works of antique science and literature have been transcribed in the Carolingian scriptoria, which would otherwise be irrecoverably lost. From the late 11th century, a new kind of educational institution appeared: the university. The first of these was at Bologna, in northern Italy. But other universities soon appeared in Paris, Oxford, Cambridge, and other places. At first, the students who attended these universities were all intended for the church. However, others soon followed, especially the sons of noblemen, who wished to study law. New curricula and philosophies. The pupils who attended these urban schools learned in them their future occupation as clerics. They learned Latin, learned to sing the various offices, and studied Holy Writ. The areas of study: grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And about the teaching style. Books were rare and expensive in the Middle Ages. The main method of teaching was by lecture. Teachers would read from books and students would take notes. There were not regular exams given, but when a student applied for a degree, they were given an exam. The University of Paris, metonymically known as the Sorbonne, appearing around 1150 as a corporation associated, it was the second oldest modern university in Europe. The University of Oxford, informally, Oxford University. It is the oldest university in England, and also the world's second oldest surviving university. It grew rapidly from 1167, when Henry II banned English students from attending the University of Paris. After disputes between students and Oxford townsfolk in 1209, some academics fled northeast to Cambridge, where they established the University of Cambridge. Scholasticism. Scholasticism is a method of critical thought, which dominated teaching by the academics of medieval universities from about 1100 to 1700, and a program of employing that method in articulating and defending dogma in an increasingly pluralistic context. It originated as an outgrowth of and a departure from Christian monastic schools at the earliest European universities. Scholasticism is not so much a philosophy or a theology as a method of learning, as it places a strong emphasis on dialectical reasoning, to extend knowledge by inference and to resolve contradictions. Because of its emphasis on rigorous dialectical method, scholasticism was eventually applied to many other fields of study. During the 11th century, developments in philosophy and theology led to increased intellectual activity. There was debate between the realists and the nominalists over the concept of universals. Some of the main figures of scholasticism include chivalry and the ethos of courtly love developed in royal and noble courts. This culture was expressed in the vernacular languages, rather than Latin, and comprised poems, stories, legends, and popular songs spread by troubadours, or wandering minstrels. Often, the stories were written down in songs of great deeds, such as the Song of Roland or the Song of Hildebrand. The Song of Roland is an epic poem based on the Battle of Roncesvalles in 778, during the reign of Charlemagne. In the 10th century, the establishment churches and monasteries led to the development of stone architecture that elaborated vernacular Roman forms, from which the term Romanesque is derived. Romanesque buildings have massive stone walls, openings topped by semicircular arches, small windows, and arched stone vaults. Gothic architecture is a style of architecture that flourished during the high and late medieval period. It evolved from Romanesque architecture and was succeeded by Renaissance architecture. Vaulted arches, flying bull trusses, thinner walls and stained glass windows. Many of the larger churches are considered priceless works of art, and are listed with UNESCO as World Heritage Sites. Technical improvements. Metallurgical engineering. During the first medieval centuries, the output of metal was in steady decline and constraint in small-scale activities. Miners adopted methods much less efficient than those of Roman times. Ores were extracted only from shallow depths from remnants of former abandoned mines, assuming that the old shafts weren't already sunk. The period right after the 10th century marks the widespread application of several innovations in the field of mining and ore treatment. It marks a shift to large-scale and better quality production. Medieval miners and metallurgists had to find solutions for the practical problems that limited former metal production in order to meet the market demands for metals. The economic value of mining resulted in investment in the development of solutions to these problems, which had a distinct positive impact on medieval metal output. This included innovations such as water power, water wheels for powering draining engines, bellows, hammers, or the introduction of advanced types of furnaces. Thus, more advanced technological achievements were introduced, in order to keep up with the demand in metal. The alchemical laboratory, separating precious metals from the baser ones they are typically found with, was an essential feature of the metallurgical enterprise. For centuries, man had relied on human and animal muscle power for all kinds of work. The water wheel enabled man for the first time to use an inanimate power source for industrial production, and it had this major impact on technological and industrial development. It made possible considerable labor savings in certain industries. It permitted massive increases in production in other industries. And it made certain industries possible that would not have been possible without the more concentrated energy which the vertical water wheel provided. The Middle Ages were rife with wars, which led to great developments in weaponry and warfare. During the Middle Ages, a number of inventions changed the way that battles were fought. Gunpowder, for example, is an obvious discovery that contributed to the later invention of cannons, which changed the way battles were fought both on the land and at sea. Siege weapons were also invented and improved upon, following the Crusades. The blueprints for these incredibly powerful weapons were brought back to Europe and modified, in order to meet the challenges faced in medieval warfare. Other important weaponry inventions include the lance, the longbow, the crossbow, the flail, armorand, and chain mail. It is in this time period that we begin to see fashion take on a temporal aspect. Wool was the most popular fabric for all classes by far, followed by linen and hemp. Wool fabrics were available in wide range of qualities, from rough undyed cloth to fine, dense broadcloth with a velvety nap. The Phoenician alphabet was one of the first alphabets with a strict and consistent form. The precursor to the Phoenician alphabet was likely of Egyptian. The oldest known representation of the Phoenician alphabet is inscribed on the sarcophagus of the king of Byblos, dating to the 11th century BC at the latest. Phoenician inscriptions are found in Lebanon, Syria, Israel, Cyprus, and other locations, as late as the early centuries of the Christian era. The Phoenicians are credited with spreading the Phoenician alphabet throughout the Mediterranean world. Phoenician traders disseminated this writing system along Aegean trade routes to Crete and Greece. The Greeks adopted the majority of these letters, but changed some of them to vowels, which were significant in their language, giving rise to the first true alphabet. In 6th century BC, some scientist in Greek as Thales, Pythagoras traveled to Mesopotamia and Egypt. Therefore, they acquired many mathematical achievements of these countries. In 5th century BC, Herodotus, Greek historians traveled many places in the east, then he wrote several works on the history of Assyria, Babylon, and Egypt. In last 4th century BC, Alexander III of Macedonia Empire, was the 14th monarch of the kingdom Arjad Macedonian, and is considered one of the most successful generals in history, who conquered almost the whole world that he knew before his death. He was often considered one of the greatest military strategists in history. After consulting the Greek polis, ancient under the rule of his father Philip II, Alexander conquered the Persian Empire. In the process of conquest, Alexander established certain military, one of which Alexandria developed into urban in Egypt. Alexandria was longitude of Egypt under dynasty Ptolemy. Greek culture also affected the Oriental architecture and sculpture. West acquired much knowledge of Oriental mathematics, especially how the calendar. The Julian calendar, introduced by Julius Caesar, was a reform of the Roman calendar. It was the predominant calendar in the Roman world, most of Europe, and in European settlements in the Americas and elsewhere. The Julian calendar has a regular year of 365 days, divided into 12 months. A leap day is added to February every 4 years. Besides Asia and North Africa, the Western countries also contacted with China civilization, in 2nd century through the Silk Road. Arab traders has an important role, because they brought civilization in the Eastern to Western Europe, as digits India, spices, fabrics, silk, inventions of paper, printing techniques, gunpowder, the compass. Arabs also learned many achievements of Western civilization. The Western Europe later also acquired much knowledge of algebra, chemistry, biology, physics, medicine, of the Arabs. Causes of the Crusades. Pope wanted to increase his power. Many serfs wanted to gain freedom. Some thought it would clear themselves from sin. And the results of this: legacy of hatred between Christians and Jews. Increased trade between the East and Western Europe. Decreased power of the Church. Italy became the center of trade. After the Crusades, people in the Western learned some new skills such as papermaking, glassmaking, gunpowder, metallurgy, or planting some new varieties rice, buckwheat, lemon. This stuff is spreading because of the merits of the Arabs, or because Crusaders learned experience from the East. The travels of Marco Polo. Marco made a work named Travelogue of Marco Polo. It was a little bragging, but it had also provided for the Western Europe some understanding about geography, human products of Oriental countries. It was a little bragging, but it had also provided for the Western Europe some understanding about geography, human products of Oriental countries. The geographic discoveries in the late 16th century and the early 17th century opened up vast possibilities for cultural contact between the continents, formed the world market and promoted industrial and commercial development.